You ever feel like you're drowning in information? I mean, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Reports, articles, opinions.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with.
Exactly. And that's where we come in, I guess. Welcome to the deep dive where we try to cut through all that noise.
We take all those long reports, all those studies and stats, and try to figure out what really
You
matters.
really need to know. So for today's deep dive, we're looking at something really interesting. Generative AI, Gen AI, and how it's being adopted or not within India's IT services industry.
Right, we've got this report, the GenAI Adoption Conundrum,
Okay.
from the Boston Consulting Group, BCG. It came out just last month, February 2025.
And it's fascinating stuff. What we really want to figure out for you is this. Why is there so much hype about Gen AI among Indian developers? Everyone's talking about it.
You see it everywhere.
But the actual numbers on people using it effectively, it's kind of surprising, really.
Yeah, there's a real disconnect.
The report says over 80% of developers, they get it, they see the value, but the actual adoption rate, folks who are using these tools well, it's less than 40%. So what's going on there? What does this mean for India's place in the global AI landscape?
Good questions.
To get into all this, we're mainly using this BCG report. They surveyed almost 1,000 developers and delivery leads back in January.
Pretty comprehensive.
And we'll also bring in some broader perspectives, from organizations like NASSCOM.
Of course, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, we can't forget them.
Right, and some insights we've picked up from talking to industry leaders, getting their take on things.
Should be interesting.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. I mean, India is already a huge player in global tech, right?
Absolutely.
We're talking $250 billion in technology trade, 5 million tech professionals, and over 58% of the global IT outsourcing market.
It's a powerhouse. The report even calls India a potential golden bird of AI.
Sounds promising.
It does, but there's a big but here. The report points to a significant challenge, and that's the talent gap. As of 2024, there was a 51% gap between the demand for GenAI skilled talent and the actual workforce.
Whoa, 51%. That's significant.
It is, and it gets worse. It's projected to widen to 53% by 2026.
So it's not going away. It's actually getting bigger.
Exactly.
So when we say talent gap, what specific skills are we talking about here?
Right. The report highlights that the biggest gaps are in what they call next-gen skills, the ones you absolutely need to really harness GenAI's power. So things like LLM fine-tuning, large language model fine-tuning, customizing those powerful AI models for specific tasks. Then you have cloud computing, machine learning, building custom AI models, even cybersecurity. Those are the areas where the demand for skilled folks is far exceeding what's available.
So not just your average coding skills. This is very specialized stuff.
Very specialized. And that's what makes this gap so crucial. The report actually frames it as a turning point for India. Will it capitalize on its current strengths and become a global leader in GenAI, right up there with the US and China? Or will it fall behind, maybe even get overtaken by what they call middle powers in the GenAI space, like the EU, South Korea, Japan, places like that?
So a real crossroads. Either seize the opportunity or risk being left behind.
Pretty much.
Now, I'm curious, what are the big players in the Indian IT industry? The CEOs, CTOs, what are they saying about all of this? Are they optimistic? Concerned?
Well, the report includes some interesting perspectives from those very folks, the leaders of the top Tier 1 IT service companies, and they are definitely seeing the potential of GenAI tools. They're very optimistic. They really believe these tools can automate a lot of those repetitive tasks that developers often get bogged down with. Some estimates even say up to 50% of those tasks could be automated.
That would free up a ton of time and resources, wouldn't it?
It would, and that's the key point they make. If you can offload those routine tasks to AI, it allows your talented developers to focus on the more complex, creative, problem-solving aspects of development.
So it's not about replacing humans, it's about augmenting them.
Exactly. They also talk about the potential for speeding up coding itself, maybe a 15–20% boost, and overall improvements in productivity and efficiency. They're even starting to view GenAI tools as, I love this phrase, virtual collaborators.
Like having another team member, but it's AI.
Precisely. And the report even mentions specific tools that are becoming popular, GitHub Copilot, Amazon Code Whisperer, Tab9, OpenAI Codex. You hear those names popping up everywhere.
Yeah, they're becoming household names, at least in tech households.
Right.
But looking beyond the skills shortage, what other big challenges are facing the Indian IT services sector? Can't just be about finding the right people.
Right. Oh, definitely not. The report actually highlights several other macro challenges, and they're all pretty significant. First, there's this constant need to adapt. Gen AI technology, it's evolving at an incredible pace. New models like DeepSeek, Llama 3, Quen, they just keep popping up. Companies need to stay agile to integrate these new advancements to keep up or risk being left behind.
It's like a constant race to stay ahead.
It is. And then, of course, there's the economic uncertainty. Vendor consolidation is happening. That always throws things into flux. Then you have customer expectations. They're rising. Everyone wants faster delivery, more innovation. And we're also seeing this shift towards outcome-based contracts, which puts even more pressure on service providers to deliver real, measurable results. And then you can't forget the increasing complexity of data privacy regulations, things like GDPR, CCPA. You got to stay on top of all that, too.
So on top of everything else, you have the legal and compliance hurdles. It sounds like a pretty challenging environment to navigate.
It is. Dynamic is the word that comes to mind.
So with all that said, how are these GenAI tools actually impacting the bottom line for these companies? We're talking revenue and costs, the real financial picture.
Right. Well, the report suggests a twofold impact, one on revenue and one on costs. Let's start with revenue. GenAI is opening up new opportunities within existing service lines. Think about modernizing those legacy systems, the older ones that are still chugging along. That's a huge potential market.
Makes sense. Companies always need to update their technology.
Exactly. And then there are completely new service offerings that are popping up. Designing data architectures specifically for training these AI models, that's a hot area right now. Plus, there's the potential for higher revenue per employee, since those developers who are skilled in these tools, they're more productive, they're more valuable, so it's like a multiplier effect on their output.
So more output, more value, more revenue.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Okay, that's the revenue side. What about costs? Are these tools helping companies save money?
That's the expectation. The thought is that with all these productivity improvements, delivery costs will go down, back office costs as well. And they actually have some real-world examples in the report. One mid-sized IT player, they reported a 20–25% efficiency gain. Another, a much bigger player, they saw their product development cycle shorten by up to 20%, all thanks to these GenAI tools.
So the impact is measurable. It's always good to see.
Definitely. And it gets even more interesting when you look at who's actually adopting these tools early on. There were some surprises there, for sure.
Like what?
Well, you might expect the tech companies, the software companies, to be the first ones jumping on this, right?
Seems logical.
It does, and they are early adopters, no question. But what's really interesting is that highly regulated industries like banking, financial services, insurance, BFSI, and healthcare, they're actually actively requesting delivery that uses these code companion tools. Which seems kind of counterintuitive at first, given how sensitive their data is. But it shows they see real value there, enough to overcome those initial concerns.
I guess if the efficiency and accuracy gains are significant enough, it makes sense, as long as there are strong security measures in place.
Right. Security is paramount.
So it sounds like it's not just a tech industry phenomenon anymore. GenAI is finding its way into all sorts of sectors.
Absolutely. And the report actually shows how the adoption maturity is different across various industries. For example, technology and communications, they're further ahead. More companies there have medium to high GenAI maturity compared to, say, banking and finance or healthcare, where it's still early days. They even give specific examples of companies using GitHub Copilot, Goldman Sachs in finance, Philips in healthcare, Shopify in retail, Dell in technology, Thales in communications. It's really spreading across the board.
So it's not just about writing code faster then.
Yeah.
How are these tools being used across the whole software development process, from start to finish?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the report highlights that coding itself, actually writing the code, it's only about 10–15% of the total time it takes to go from a software request to its actual release. So there's a lot more to it than just that.
Right, the whole software development lifecycle, SDLC, it's much broader than just coding.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that their survey found that among developers who use GenAI for coding, 60% of them also use it for testing their software, and 55% use it for code reviews. So it's clearly going beyond just code generation.
So it's impacting multiple phases of the SDLC, not just one. Can you give some specific examples of how it's being used in those different phases?
Sure. So you've got the initial strategy and planning phase, then the design phase, then you go into build, test, verify, integrate, and finally you release the software. Pair programming tools can support various tasks across all those phases. For example, during the build and test phase, they can help generate code snippets, speed up the creation of those unit tests. The report says they could be 40–50% faster at writing those tests. They can even help with code reviews, checking the code for errors and vulnerabilities. And they can even generate documentation, which is always a tedious task.
So it's like having an extra set of eyes and a really smart set of eyes at every stage.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, you mentioned this survey that was part of the report. Can you tell us a bit more about how they went about gathering this data, who they talked to?
Yeah, they were pretty thorough. They surveyed about 800 developers and 200 delivery leads from both IT service companies and those focused on building software products all across India. They really wanted to get a good mix of people in different roles and types of companies.
So a representative sample.
Exactly. And they didn't just send out a survey. They also did over 20 in-depth interviews with industry leaders, to really understand what's driving adoption, what's holding it back, and what they think the future holds.
Getting that qualitative insight.
Right. And they even looked at the specific tech stacks being used by those who are using GenAI pair programmers. What programming languages are they using? Java and Python were the most common. What IDEs, integrated development environments are they using? Things like Visual Studio Code and IntelliJ were popular. And of course, which GenAI tools are they actually working with?
Trying to get a complete picture of the tools and the people using them.
Right.
And what do they find out about the actual impact these tools are having on the development teams?
Well, the feedback from those actually using the tools, it was pretty positive overall. 83% of developers said their productivity had improved. 78% said they were saving time on their tasks and that the quality of their code was better. And it wasn't just the developers who were seeing the benefits. 84% of those working directly with clients, the client partners, they said their win rates were higher when they talked about their team's GenAI capabilities in their pitches.
So clients are starting to see the value too.
They are, and perhaps the most interesting finding, 92% of leaders said their clients were actually willing to pay a premium for projects and resources that use GenAI pair programming tools.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's becoming a competitive advantage.
It really seems that way.
Which brings us back to that central question. If all this is true, if everyone's excited about GenAI, if it's easy to use, if there are all these benefits, then why is the proficient adoption rate still below 40%? The report calls this the adoption conundrum.
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
The report really digs into this. Over 80% of developers, they say they get it, they see the value, they connect it with being more productive and even potentially earning more. But the actual consistent use of these tools, people really becoming proficient, it's just not happening at the rate you'd expect. And here's another thing. You'd think the younger generation, Gen Z, they'd be all over this, right? Digital natives and all that.
Yeah, you think so?
But no, their adoption rate is actually even lower, only 31%. So there's something else going on here. It's more than just being comfortable with technology.
That is surprising. So what gives?
Well, the report tries to break it down. They identify 4 types of Gen Z users. First, you have the proficient adopters, about 31% of them. They use the tools regularly. They trust the AI suggestions. They're really getting value out of them.
Okay, those are the ones we want to see more of.
Exactly. Then there are the passive adopters, about 29%. They see the potential, but they're not consistent. Maybe they use the tools sometimes, but not all the time. Then you have the reluctant adopters, 27% of them. They don't really trust the tools. They don't use them much. They're just not on board. And finally, you have the emerging adopters, about 13%. They use the tools every day, but they're still skeptical. They don't fully trust the output.
So even among Gen Z, there's a whole range of attitudes and behaviors towards these tools.
Right. It's not a monolithic group. They all have their own experiences and perspectives.
So what's stopping more developers, especially those Gen Z folks, from becoming those proficient adopters that we need? What are the main obstacles here?
Well, the report identifies several key barriers, things that were consistently mentioned by developers, client partners, and delivery leads. The biggest one, mentioned by 46% of respondents, is tool performance. They're running into issues. The tools aren't always working as smoothly or reliably as they'd like.
So glitches and bugs, the classic tech problems.
Exactly. Closely related to that, 66% pointed to client concerns around security and data privacy as a major obstacle. And that's understandable, especially in those highly regulated industries. But then 55% of respondents also mentioned fears about losing their jobs, which is kind of ironic given the huge demand for AI skill.
Right. It's like a fear that the AI will automate them out of a job.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of awareness. 38% of respondents said they just weren't aware of all the things these tools could do. They didn't know the full range of capabilities. And then another big one, 56% felt there was a lack of scientific, rigorous methods for measuring the impact of using these tools. So it's hard to prove the value if you can't properly measure it.
Makes sense. Data is king or queen in this day and age.
Yeah.
So you mentioned client concerns around security and privacy. The report goes deeper into that, right?
Yeah. It does. Even when clients are open to using GenAI tools, 32% of them want to see solid proof of value, hard evidence that it's going to benefit them. They're not just going to take your word for it. They want to see real results from companies like theirs, preferably with numbers to back it up.
So it's not enough to just demo the technology. You have to show the real-world impact.
Right. And this hesitancy on the client side is having a real effect. 1 in 2 delivery leads said they're not investing in more licenses for these tools because of pushback from clients. So it's a bit of a catch-22. It's hard to show the value without widespread adoption, but clients are hesitant to adopt without clear proof of value.
Tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
So how does training come into play here? It seems like getting people properly trained on these tools could help overcome some of these barriers, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And the report actually highlights that a lot of the training that's happening right now, it's just not very effective. They say that 80–90% of the workforce, they've gotten some kind of basic Gen AI training, an introductory course or something.
Okay, so most people have at least some exposure.
Right. But only 27% have gotten more advanced proficiency-based training. And the difference in impact is huge. Those who had 5 or more tailored training sessions, they said they were accepting the AI-generated output almost all the time, 47% of them. But those who only had 1 or 2 of those general trainings, their acceptance rate was only 12%.
So quality over quantity when it comes to training.
It really seems that way. And they specifically mention prompt engineering as a skill that's in high demand, how to effectively craft instructions for these AI models to get the results you want. 52% of those who got tailored prompt engineering training said they were accepting the AI's output more often.
So knowing how to talk to the AI is just as important as knowing how to use the tools.
Precisely.
What about other kinds of support? What are developers saying they need to become more proficient with these tools?
Well, 29% of them said they wanted more formal support channels. Dedicated help desks where they could get quick answers to their questions, expert office hours where they could talk to someone who really knows the tools inside and out. They also want better self-help resources, comprehensive documentation, FAQs, things like that. And they're looking for more opportunities to collaborate with their peers, to share knowledge and learn from each other.
So it's about creating a whole ecosystem of support, not just a one-off training session.
Exactly, because these tools, they can be tricky to use. There's a lot of trial and error involved, and if you don't have that support system in place, people can get frustrated and give up.
Especially those who are new to this whole thing. Now, we talked about those fears of job displacement earlier. The report goes deeper into that, right? It's a real psychological barrier for some people.
It is. 46% of developers working in product companies, they said they were worried that Gen AI tools could threaten their jobs within the next 5 years. And you can understand why they'd feel that way. If a machine can do your job, what happens to you?
Right. It's a legitimate concern.
It is. And then beyond that specific fear, there's also this more general resistance to change, inertia. People get comfortable with the way they do things. The report found that 24% of developers didn't even really understand why their company had adopted these tools in the first place. So if you don't understand the rationale, you're less likely to embrace it.
You need to see the bigger picture.
Right. And then even among the Gen Z folks, 37% of them in those Tier 1 IT services companies, they said they were having trouble adapting to the new ways of working that these tools require. Or they had issues with compatibility. The tools didn't work well with their preferred coding environments.
So even for the tech-savvy generation, there are growing pains.
There are. And then there's that issue we talked about before, the difficulty in measuring the actual benefits of using these tools.
Right. If you can't measure it, it's hard to justify the investment.
Exactly. 56% of delivery leads said their organization just didn't have a good way of measuring the productivity gains or code quality improvements that came from using GenAI tools. Without good metrics, without a standardized way of tracking the impact, it becomes all about gut feeling and anecdotes. And that's not enough to convince skeptical clients. In fact, 29% of delivery leads said they were facing client resistance specifically because they couldn't show a clear ROI.
So it's not just about using the tools, it's about having the infrastructure in place to track the results.
Right. You need that data to make informed decisions, to demonstrate value to clients, to justify further investment.
Totally. And what about those technical performance issues that we touched on earlier? The report goes into detail on those, right?
It does. They call it performance pitfalls and integration woes. 38% of developers said they'd run into problems when working with large, complex code bases. The tools just couldn't handle it.
So the AI is still limited in some ways.
It is. And then 36% of millennial developers, they said they didn't fully trust the tools because they'd seen them generate incorrect code in the past. So there's this issue of trust that needs to be built.
Makes sense. If the tool gives you bad code, you're going to be hesitant to use it again.
Exactly. And then for Gen Z, integration problems were a big issue. 35% of them said they were reluctant to use these tools because they didn't play nice with their other tools and APIs. The report even gives specific examples of these integration challenges, like difficulties connecting to internal knowledge bases and problems with input-output processing across different operating systems and IDEs.
So it's a complex picture, lots of potential, but some very real challenges that need to be addressed. So the big question is, how do we overcome these challenges? How do we move from all this interest and potential to real impact? What's the winning playbook, as the report calls it, for scaling GenAI adoption in a way that actually works?
Right. Well, the report emphasizes that there's no silver bullet here. It's not just about doing one thing right. It's about a multifaceted approach, a combination of strategies working together. The first key element is customized, proficiency-based training. And they stress that it needs to be tailored to different skill levels, from basic to advanced. They also highlight the need for specialized training on things like prompt engineering. Companies that are investing in those kinds of specialized courses and certifications, they're seeing much better results.
So it's about giving people the specific skills they need, not just generic training.
Right. But training alone isn't enough. They also talk about the need for strong systemic support. Dedicated help desks, easy-to-access resources, maybe even internal GenAI microsites where people can find all the information and support they need.
So it's about creating a supportive environment where people feel comfortable experimenting and learning.
Exactly.
Okay, what's the next piece of the puzzle?
The next key element is about building client confidence. You have to be able to prove the value of these tools. That means developing those proof of concept projects, those POCs, that are specifically tailored to each client's needs. And then when you're pitching to clients, you need to show them the real-world benefits, the ROI. Not just hype, but data.
Show me the money, basically.
Pretty much. And it's also crucial to address those security concerns head-on. Highlight the built-in security features of the tools, talk about data privacy, make sure clients feel confident that their data is protected.
So it's about transparency and building trust.
Exactly. And then the third key element, this one's really important, is scientific tracking. You need to be able to measure the impact of GenAI adoption in a rigorous, data-driven way. This serves two purposes. First, it gives you transparency with clients. You can show them the value they're getting. And second, it allows you to internally measure productivity gains, code quality improvements, all those things that are hard to quantify without a good tracking system.
So it's about making data-driven decisions both for yourself and for your clients.
Right. The report even gives examples of specific metrics to track, things like team velocity, time saved on tasks, defect rates, code review efficiency, the number of active users, how much GenAI-generated code is being accepted. And they talk about using existing tools like JRA and SonarCube to create dashboards so you can see this data in real time.
So making the data visible and actionable.
Exactly. And then the final element of the winning playbook is all about incentives and gamification. You need to make using these tools rewarding for developers, encourage them to embrace the change.
Make it fun, too, maybe.
Exactly. The report suggests things like expert badges for those who demonstrate innovative use cases, gamified dashboards to track progress, and even integrating tool adoption into performance reviews. They even mention a company that ran internal campaigns to increase developer engagement with GenAI tools.
So it's about changing the culture, making it cool to use these tools.
Right, exactly.
Now, beyond those four key elements, are there any other factors that play a big role in successful adoption?
Yes, they emphasize the importance of mentorship and internal champions. Having experienced people who can guide and support others, it can make a huge difference. They found that companies with dedicated GenAI centers of excellence, they were seeing much better results in terms of training, resource access, and tracking.
So it's about having the internal expertise and leadership.
Right. And these COEs, they can have specialized roles like adoption analysts, solution champions, change management specialists, and learning and development champions. They can all work together to really drive adoption forward.
So it's not just a tech problem, it's an organizational and cultural problem as well.
Absolutely. And the report has this great case study that illustrates all of this in action. It's about a collaboration between BCG and Microsoft, and they were focused on driving GitHub Copilot adoption across different types of clients. They had some clients who were hesitant, some who had low usage, and some who were convinced about the tool but weren't seeing the productivity gains they expected.
So a good mix of real-world scenarios.
Right. For the hesitant clients, they focused on addressing security concerns, and that actually led to those clients activating their licenses. For the low usage clients, they used gamified training and more proactive support, and that led to a 17% increase in usage and a 30% rise in awareness of the tool's capabilities. And for the clients who weren't seeing the productivity gains, they came up with customized solutions and training programs, and that unlocked a potential 10–15% productivity improvement.
So different approaches for different needs.
Exactly. And the case study also talks about exploring new value sharing models, like gain share and shared investment models. So it's about aligning incentives between the IT service providers and their clients.
Interesting. So it's not just about technology, it's about business models too.
Right. It's about finding ways to make this work for everyone involved.
Now, the report doesn't just focus on the present, it also looks to the future. And they talk about this concept of disrupt or be disrupted. They say Gen AI is just the beginning, that we're moving towards something called Agentic AI. What is Agentic AI and how is it different from Gen AI?
Right. They describe GenAI as being at the bottom of the hockey stick growth curve, meaning we're about to see some huge advancements. Agentic AI is the next phase, they say. And it's not just about AI assisting with tasks, it's about AI making decisions, executing complex workflows autonomously without human intervention.
So it's a much higher level of automation. What are the key differences between Gen AI and Agentic AI?
Well, GenAI, it's great at specific tasks like generating code or content. Agentic AI is about orchestrating entire workflows. It can take in real-time data, use specialized tools, interact with systems using natural language. It can even solve problems and make decisions based on predefined goals. It's a big step towards autonomous systems.
So it's not just about doing what you tell it to do, it's about figuring things out on its own.
Exactly.
How is this shift to Agentic AI going to change the software development process?
The report talks about the rise of what they call full-service studios and AI refineries. Basically, companies will be able to create reusable Gen AI-powered solutions that will streamline the whole development process from beginning to end. They'll be able to reinvent the way software is built and delivered.
So it's about rethinking the whole process, making it much more efficient and automated. Can you give some specific examples of how Agentic AI might be used in the different phases of the SDLC?
Sure. In the early stages, you could have AI agents that automate workflows, designing and managing different parts of the development process. You could have AI-powered tools that accelerate DevOps by predicting and preventing build failures. Testing and QA could become much more sophisticated, with AI agents that automatically generate and execute test cases, review code for errors, and identify vulnerabilities. And even in maintenance and support, you could have AI agents that monitor application health, predict problems, and even apply fixes automatically.
So it's about taking the human out of the loop, or at least minimizing the human involvement.
In many cases, yes.
Are there any real-world examples of Agentic AI tools that are being developed or used right now?
They mention a few in the report. GitHub has something called Copilot Agent Mode, which has all sorts of advanced features like self-healing, the ability to execute API calls automatically, integration with terminal commands, and context-aware reasoning. Amazon is also working on agentic AI capabilities within their Bedrock platform, things like autonomous code iteration, natural language task orchestration, task inference, and secure data access.
So the big players are already investing in this technology.
They are, and the report emphasizes that it's not just about pilot projects anymore. Companies are starting to make serious investments in building and deploying agentic AI systems.
So this is happening, it's not just science fiction.
It's becoming very real.
And then they touch on this even more futuristic concept, artificial general intelligence, AGI. What's that all about?
Right, that's like the ultimate goal of AI research. AGI would be an AI system that has human-level reasoning abilities, the ability to solve problems across a wide range of domains. Basically an AI that's as smart as a human, if not smarter. If we ever achieve true AGI, it would completely transform the world, including software development. The report basically ends with a warning. If you don't embrace Gen AI now, you're going to be left behind. The future of the IT industry, the future of